we're here on FI Institute TV responding to President Macron's historic speech today. I've got Justin Doherty from FII and Adrian Hoxha, who's the Honorary Consul to Latvia. And we've just heard President Macron give a speech here. This is obviously on the back of President Trump speaking at FII in Miami, but also we had the Saudi-US Investment Forum just a few days ago. Justin, how significant is the fact that Macron is here? I think it's pretty significant.
It felt like a historic moment. Actually, he said this is the second time that he had been to Albania in the last 18 months, and before that hadn't been here for 100 years. So this was a moment in time, and I thought he was very, very clear, very, very focused. He had one message, which was, things are changing, Europe needs to change, and he offered a prescription which included the need to address competitiveness and overregulation.
And Adrian, do you think it's significant, the fact that he chose to come to Albania?
For sure, it's a statement, and it's a reassuring statement as well, and also a show of support, and basically an invitation also to have investors from all over the world come invest in Europe and also in Albania. And also he mentioned the fact that Albania has delivered on all that was asked by the EU, and that all of these actions prove to how safe it is to invest in Albania, which he also mentioned that will soon be joining the EU and become a full-fledged member.
He did definitely mention that. I thought, like every French president, he hoped that this event would have been in France rather than Albania. But it's interesting that he hardly mentioned France. He talked about Europe and what Europe needs to do. And I felt like he'd almost been a fly on the wall in the discussions that had been happening before his speech, where every investor was talking about the challenges they are facing in investing in Europe and what Europe needs to do to be competitive. Did you?
Well, he talked about simplifying regulations, and he actually said he thinks that the Commission is too shy to simplify the regulations. So, he was addressing that issue full on, and we saw Ursula von der Leyen yesterday here talking about the same thing. So there's clearly a discussion going on about the need to do these things, but to do them quickly, because that was the other speed.
He did talk about speed. How did you think? He sort of was it diagnosis or prescription?
I think it was both, and why I think they are all talking about Europe is because over the past 50, 60 years, rightfully so, leaders were focusing on individual countries, and especially the stronger countries. But now we are competing with the whole world, and you have many regions in the world competing, and not as single small country markets, but as regions, as continents. And Europe, because it has so many countries within the Union, and each country has their own regulation, which has become basically an obstacle for the speedy growth that the rest of the world has been growing at. And the idea is now that there is some global chaos and some global crisis, it's time to restructure, reorganize, and set new rules of the game, set a new environment of growth. And Europe doesn't want to be left behind in all of the developments, whether it's energy, whether it's AI, whether it's all of the revolutions that are happening in the world. And I think that he's emphasizing that Europe should act as a whole and have same policies, and also the Western Balkans is part of the larger...
part of that discussion.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting that he actually picked out sectors. He talked about AI, he talked about energy, he talked about security, and investment going into those sectors, almost like he was outlining what could be a new industrial strategy for Europe. How did you think about that, Justin?
Yeah, I mean that's been a theme that's been picked up this afternoon in the discussions, and clearly he was offering some prescription there. I'm just picking up on your point, Adrian. He talked about the wider Europe. I mean that's also really interesting. Breaking away from making this an EU discussion. Obviously, yesterday was all about this wider European community. I mean, it felt like he was being not just statesman-like, but rising above a lot of the kind of fray and the kind of discussions about which direction the EU was going to take. I thought it was very.
Well, it was very much. I hear you. I hear what's being said, and I think the fact that he chose to do it at an investment conference itself. I mean, he could have given the speech at any other time, but he gave it at an investment conference. The FII conference that obviously bring together policymakers and a whole bunch of people. I thought that was also.
And he's got his conference coming up on Monday in Versailles, so he'll be hosting investors from around the world in France.
Yeah. So basically, if you look at it, most of the unicorn companies, even if they are started in Europe, because of overregulation, they move to the US.
And that's been a theme we've been hearing over the last couple of days.
So basically, Europe has the potential, has the talent, has the resources. We just need to basically change the way we do business in Europe and hopefully catch up with all the latest developments throughout the world. We see how China is advancing in all kinds of innovations, and especially with AI, and really challenging even the US. So I think the US and Europe will have a bright future. And I personally see all of Trump's initiatives as very positive, although they seem a bit scary at the moment. But
Talk about Trump. I mean, it was interesting how he framed that. He said we're putting tariffs on ourselves.
That was very interesting.
He described the overregulation as us tariffing ourselves. Which
So never mind the US tariffs. The Europe's overregulation is creating a tariff on Europe.
Yep.
And I thought that was interesting. I really like the way he talked about the financial crisis, that Europe's response to the global financial crisis was to regulate capital so much that European banks can't lend to European businesses, and that needs to change. So there was a lot of meat in that speech that for me made it more than a courtesy call to the FII to sort of say a few sort of platitudes. I haven't been in a political seat to get that, but I think this was a very coherent, well thought out presentation.
And he set the tone for the day, and I think a lot of people followed that idea in the sessions that followed.
Do we think the stability point he made is significant? Because he, right at the end of his speech, actually this was after the speech, he came back and he said, well, Europe is a stable place to invest.
That should be one of Europe's trump cards when we're talking to people.
So usually for companies, for organizations, we talk about will to live. And it's the same for countries and for continents. And I think that the will to live in Europe was kind of really, really low. And so, we saw how the war in Ukraine happened. Like nobody would have thought that it would happen. And then all of the events that followed, all of the energy crisis that followed, all of the inflation that followed from the energy crisis. And I think Trump saw that things are moving really, really slow, and he only has 4 years, so he wants to change things, and he wants to do it quick. So also coming from the business world, he knows some of the tactics, and it really came as a shock. But I think that all European leaders are looking at it from a positive perspective rather than a negative perspective, from an opportunity perspective rather than a negative perspective.
Yeah, I think we can say often you go to these conferences and at the end of it on your way home, you ask yourself, okay, it's been 2 or 3 days there, what came out of it? And obviously out of FII, you normally get lots of deals being announced. But I think there's something different that's potentially happened, which is what could be a reset in terms of how Europe thinks about competitiveness, innovation, and growth?
I think it's a big tone shift, and I think we heard that tone shift today. I think we heard it yesterday at the political conference. I think we're seeing it in these new partnerships that are happening. Trump's visit to Saudi last week. You know, there is a tone shift, a vibe shift going on, and I think it's worth paying notice to that.
Yeah, I think globally, a more entrepreneurial spirit is rising. You know, not the old way of doing politics.
And that was another point that Penny Richards, the CEO of FII, made this morning when she was speaking, that you know, these partnerships, capital is no longer defined by geography in the same way that it was, and geography is increasingly less relevant.
Well, capital moves, people moves, ideas move. They're all mobile, after all.
And we've all come to Tirana this week,
Tirana
to,
this week,
to
exactly.
prove that point.
I think Macron offered the leadership vision that, as many have said, has been lacking in Europe. And what we want to see is actually want to see it carried forward post this conference.
And I think politics were probably put to one side for this. You know, this wasn't about scoring points within a EU context. This was about embracing a wider Europe. I mean, he talked about the 700 million people.
That's true.
And you know, this was about. I think this was almost a pitch to all of those people, that wider community, for action, for moving fast. You know, he said accelerating our competitiveness. I mean, there was a real sense of urgency, I think, in what he was saying.
Definitely. I mean, it's an opportunity for any leader from Europe. And usually we've seen mostly France and Germany lead all of the ideas in Europe. So I think Macron is now stepping up to the challenge and taking on the challenge of providing leadership. And I think it's very positive. And we can see on all of the initiatives, including the Ukraine war, how he's basically showing leadership. And I think it's promising.
Well, the reality behind the rhetoric of what Macron articulated today is that Europe needs deep structural change to be competitive. Mm-hmm. And that's going to require a lot of hard yards. And that's what I saw when I was in government. You know, the speeches, you know, it's great to identify the problem, great to be able to make the speech, but even greater challenge to actually get it done.
Do you think he wants a kind of Trumpian style, kind of radical kind of reshaping of these things? Because that's what's going on the other side of the Atlantic.
I think he's always done. I mean, if you look at his presidency, the early part of his presidency, and he mentioned that today, he talked about labour market reform in France, pension reform in France. So he's got it in him. But let's not sort of kid ourselves. If you've been in government and you know how these things are done, and he's talking on behalf of 27 plus countries, this is going to require a lot of hard work to get done.
As entrepreneurs, we say that the best government is no government. So basically, the more deregulation we have, the more easier we make it for entrepreneurs, for companies to grow, the better. And I think the all of Europe can learn a lot from the US in this respect.
Thank you very much for coming.